Hi, this is Long Vo, and today I would like to analyze one of my games from the Burlington Chess Club, played on June the 12th, 2012, round 5 of the Burlington Chess Club tournament. And at this point in time, I'm rated 1354, and my opponent, Louis Saka, is rated 1720. So I'm very proud of this game because he's a much higher rated player than I am. So let's get started. So the first move is e4. So I do like to play the e4 opening because I find it more aggressive. And my opponent plays g6, and I guess he has in mind the idea of fianchetering his bishop, and probably in my mind I was thinking he would castle kingside. So I took the opportunity to take control of the center with d4, and he plays bishop g7, and I wanted to restrict that bishop, so I advance the pawn, so e5, and I'm not sure if this makes sense in opening theory, because you don't want to advance your pawns too much, because obviously you're not developing your minor pieces if you're advancing your pawns, but that was my idea, just to restrict that bishop. And so he plays d6. Now he's challenging my e-pawn, so I decided to add another defender, and I could have added the bishop or the knight, but I decided to go with f4 because I do like the idea of going the knight afterwards. Okay, so that way then it doesn't restrict that pawn over here. So I think it's also against opening theory, right? So at this point I haven't developed anything. The only thing that I achieved was opening some files for the bishops. Okay, so now my opponent takes, so d takes e, and I decided to retake with the f pawn instead of the d pawn, because if you take with the d pawn, then it opens up for the queen to exchange, and then once the king exchanges, then you can't castle anymore. So taking with the f pawn made more sense for me. Now Louis plays knight c6, attacking, putting pressure on both the d and e pawns. And at this point, I could have played something like knight f3, but I don't like that, because what often happens is then the opponent plays bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen, and then really putting a lot of pressure on the d pawn. Later on he can capture, and then I would be down a pawn, and this knight can't really defend, right? And then if I start defending with the bishop here, and then he can exchange, takes, right, so I don't want to have an isolated pawn here. So, and if I retake here, then same thing, the pawn hangs. So I decided to defend with bishop e3, and then he goes f5, putting pressure on the c2 pawn. And so here I had the idea of pinning his knight, so going bishop by b5, pinning the knight to the king, and then perhaps later on advancing this pawn to put pressure on the knight, and he can't go anywhere, so then I would trap the knight. I think that was a bad move because he replies with queen to d5, and this is a double attack, attacking the bishop and the pawn on the g pawn, and then attacking the rook afterwards. So obviously, if I defend the pawn with by developing the knight, then the bishop hangs. So I didn't think I had a choice here, so I had to exchange with the knight, and obviously capturing with the b pawn would not make sense, doubling his pawn, so he recaptured with the queen, and still exerting that pressure with the double attack, still pressure on the g pawn, and now he's going to take the c pawn, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I had the idea of perhaps going the queen here to defend both, but this one is not really being defended, right? Because it's 2 against 1, and he'll take that pawn no matter what. So I decided, I guess I made a mistake, and I'll be down a pawn, but you know, sticking with the opening principles, I continued developing. So obviously now I have to defend the g pawn, so knight goes to f3, and as expected he captured the c pawn, attacking the queen, so the queen goes to e2. So now I did have the option to go to d2 as well, but I figured, and normally I do like to do that, and then perhaps exchanging bishops over here. The knight was still there, but eventually that would be the idea, because if the bishop is fianchettoed, in my mind he would castle kingside. So I went queen e2 instead, because in this case I would be covering more squares. So over here the bishop is already covering all the dark squares, and having the queen here and covering these dark squares didn't make sense to me, because I figured the king would castle kingside anyway. So if I went here and took care of the light squares, I would have it would be a better position for the queen. So now he castles queenside, which surprised me, because now I found that his bishop was very ill placed, very constricted already by my pawns, and he can't really go here, right? Because I would simply exchange, and then he's really stuck there, and it's not very active. So I think I was glad that he castled that way. So the next move was knight to c3, disconnecting the queen and the bishop, so I could attack the bishop. So and really developing the knight, right? So I knew he would retreat the bishop, and the idea was not really to trap the bishop, because I didn't think he would fall for something that easily, but it was sort of like developing my knight with gaining a temple, so he would have to retreat the bishop, and not instead of developing something else. So I was happy with that move, and at this point, even though I'm down a pawn, I felt that I was better developed, because I had the 3 minor pieces, the queen, and only one move from connecting the rooks and completing development, whereas he was sort of crammed in here with this bishop not being very active. The knight doesn't really have a good place to go. This is the only spot he could go, and then that would still connect the rooks and finish his development, but I felt that all his pieces were on the king side and not really he didn't really have a lot of pieces defending on the queen side, whereas because he took the c pawn, I had a semi-open file here. So my next move was obviously to take advantage of that, going rook c1, getting an X-ray on the queen there. So he played a move that I didn't think was very strong. He played a6. I guess he figured I would have liked to move my knight here, X-raying the queen, putting a discovered attack on the queen, and that the knight would be protected by my queen, right? So that was also the idea of going the queen here, so that I would cover more light squares and have more options. So he went the pawn to prevent the knight from going there. I didn't really have the intention of going the knight there immediately, so that was a prophylactic move. But so when I saw that, I saw that, you know what, now my bishop can go in here, right? So the next move was to open the file for the bishop, but of course I wanted to keep the king safe before that, so I castled. And now my development was complete, and then it was time to attack. Now he develops his knight to h6. I guess that was the only move that he had. So this is my idea of opening the file for my bishop and attacking the queen at the same time. So now the queen retreats to d7, because if she went to e8, that would sort of disconnect the rook. So he decided to move the queen on d7, which I think made sense. Now my idea was really to go there. But before that, I thought that if I went my my rook to d1 and x-raying the queen furthermore and supporting the d pawn, it made more sense. And so now my opponent goes knight to g4, attacking my bishop. And I was really happy when he did that, because it gave me the opportunity to go bishop a7, which I had the intention from the start. But now he's attacking it, so it's sort of like a 2-for-1, right? So going where I want to and escaping the bishop. So now I guess the bishop is not there, so he decides to develop his bishop furthermore on h6, attacking my rook. And so I was also happy with this move, because well, first of all, I didn't want to move that rook, because it's very well placed on that semi-open file, x-raying the king, but with that bishop, the light square bishop covering the this diagonal, the light square diagonal, and now the dark square bishop covering that, the dark square diagonal going back to a1 really would be restricting my rook, and a really bad move. So I felt I had no choice but to move my my knight to block, which, like I said, I was happy with that move, because now his king is on the queen side, and I was planning to develop all my minor pieces towards the queen side to attack the king. So that was a good thing for me as well. And because now that the bishop here is restricting the king, and the king is smothered by his own pieces here, I thought that if somehow I got a knight either here, this would be, well, of course it would need support before that, but this would be a good opportunity to basically force the queen to exchange. or if I went here, that would be checkmate as well, because the c pawn here is pinned. Okay, so having two knights in the picture was even more aggressive. So I thought that the knight in this closed position would be really strong. So I didn't mind being down a bishop, right? So my opponent had the bishop pair, which as you can see is very powerful here, almost restricting my rook. But overall, I was happy to move the knight there. Now he plays bishop to f4, which I thought, obviously I saw the idea of attacking the king, right? So this was a more centralized position for his bishop. But I thought that if he went perhaps knight to e3, that would be a better move, because if I was him at this point, I would really concentrate on disturbing this all these x-ray attacks by the really active rooks. So I thought that if he went there, and then I would have to move the rooks, and that would lose some tempo, and the rook going back to the e file is not as dangerous as the rook on the d file x-raying the queen. So anyways, he went the bishop to f4, attacking the pawn there, and so I had to defend. So I went to g3, attacking the bishop. Now what I didn't see was the hanging e pawn being attacked by the bishop and the knight. So he took that pawn, and that was okay, because now it would give me the opportunity to move my knight on c4, which the idea was not to attack the bishop, right? So the idea was to move my knight closer to this move, but of course now I have two knights blocking the rook. So I didn't care about his bishop, right? He could have retreated it, or here on f6, but this was sort of a like a fake attack on the bishop, right? So I wanted him to be distracted by that move of the knight to c4, and thinking that I was interested in attacking the bishop, but really I was interested in this square. So my next move would have been knight to a4, and if the queen takes, then I would checkmate him, because even though the queen moves, the knight is covering that square as well. So that would be checkmate, and so that was my next move. But now he saw that his bishop was under attack, so I don't know if he panicked, or and I don't understand why he would exchange the with the knight, or maybe he saw the threat of having too many knights around the king there, so he decided to exchange. But that actually, after that move, I knew that the game was pretty much over, because he really helped me open that file with the tempo, right? So now I would recapture with the rook, and that file now is open. So the next move is he's losing his queen. So once I check him over here, so it's a double, well, first of all, it's checkmate, unless he does something. But even if he moves the queen right now, if I go here, it's still checkmate. So I thought in my mind that he wouldn't move the queen, and he would probably have an escape move for his king. So if later on I do check him there, then the king could escape, and then I would capture the queen, and perhaps he would capture back with the bishop, and he's still in a really bad position, but I guess that's the best he could do, and and now his rooks are really crammed in here, but he's allowed to bring some of the minor pieces back to defend the king. So perhaps the knight can retreat later, and somehow he would find a way to retreat the king. But at least the king is further away from my bishop here, so I thought that was, probably the best thing he could do. Instead, he went his queen to b5, which I guess made sense as well, because that way he could at least exchange with the knight, eat the knight, capture the knight with the queen, because he couldn't capture with the pawn, because this pawn would be pinned to the king. So when I checked him, he had to exchange, right? So he had to capture the knight, and then I captured the queen, and my bishop could not be captured because now the pawn is still pinned. So he decided to defend that pawn, and sort of developing the rook a little bit more, and that way perhaps bring the other rook into play eventually. And so now I brought the queen to c4, because I thought that if I brought the rooks, doubling the rooks here, I don't think it was as powerful, because if the rook or the bishop takes, it wasn't as powerful, because then the rooks don't have that diagonal, right? So it's a good chance to do some discovered attacks here, like a windmill type of attack, but somehow I thought the queen would be stronger, because but I'm not sure if that was a mistake, because why would I lead with the queen, right? So but I guess it makes sense that if I ate with the bishop here, he couldn't recapture, because then the queen would go in, and then it's checkmate. So I guess it made sense in a right. It made a bit of sense. So, anyways, it was played, and he decided to retreat the knight, bring in the knight back for defense, and attacking the queen at the same time. So then I thought, yeah, so maybe that was a mistake from my part, moving the queen there, because now he's attacking the queen and I'm losing a temple. And I didn't want to move the queen off that c file, because I thought it was very aggressive to have both the rook and the queen there. So I just moved the queen to c5, still maintaining that pressure. So now he feels the pressure, and the next move would be obviously bishop takes c7. So he moves his pawn to c6, and I knew that my d pawn wasn't really threatened, because it was the c pawn was pinned to the king, but I really wanted a good outpost for the bishop on c7, putting a lot of pressure on the king, restricting all the movements, and bringing, once the bishop was in here, I would open the diagonal for the queen to go in, and either here or here for the final checkmate. So I decided to advance the pawn, and I knew that if he captures, then I would simply bring the rook in and exchange rooks. That would work. So if he took the pawn, then I would take back, and if he takes, then I take. Then it's a checkmate threat here, and there's not much he can do about it. So I thought that would have been I wouldn't have minded if he took that pawn, but of course he was he saw that, right? And also by moving my my pawn to d6, I was attacking the knight with the discovered attack from the queen, so he had to defend the knight as well. So now I wasn't sure what to do, and so I continue with my line of thought of using that outpost for my bishop. So that exerts a lot of pressure on the king and opening the diagonal for the queen. So now he decides to exchange e takes d. And then I thought to myself, well, perhaps I made a mistake here because, now it's like the outpost is gone, and it wouldn't make sense to go the queen down here now, because he would simply take the bishop and then the whole attack fails. So I guess I had no other choice but to retreat the bishop and take back. Bishop takes d6, but now the king has an escape, so my plan didn't work very well, and my bishop here is also under attack, because I knew his next move would be the rook to d8, followed by perhaps knight on f7. Now he has 3 attackers on the bishop, and I only have 2 defenders, and I couldn't retreat the rook here to defend further. So the attack was sort of falling apart. So I knew that his next move would be to move knight to f7 to put more pressure. So I had to find a way to counterattack. So I decided to go rook b3. So this way, when he goes knight f7 attacking the bishop, then I could leave the bishop, right? So I could go queen to a7, and eventually exerting a lot of pressure on the king. So what I didn't see though was that once he took the bishop with the knight to d6, if I checked him here to drive the king here, if I checked him on a8 to drive the king to c7, and then I thought I would checkmate him here, but then now the knight was here, so that wouldn't make sense. He would simply recapture and the whole thing falls apart. So so I was kind of, a bit stressed. So now I was worried that my attack would fall apart. But I knew that now that the b pawn here was only protected by the rook here, so I was okay taking the knight with rook takes d6, because I knew that if he took with the rook to d6, this would be a checkmate. So that was fine. So I still had an attack, and my next move, obviously I knew I would capture this pawn, exerting a lot of pressure, and once he blocks with the rook, then I could take with the queen and exert a lot of pressure, and eventually winning his rook. And at this point he didn't have any moves to play. There was nothing he could do. His position was lost, and I guess he went bishop to h3, I guess restricting my king here, but without the dark square bishop it was still open, and I knew he had the idea of somehow his only chance was to bring some rooks down here on the first rank, and somehow attack the king, but I wasn't gonna let him do that, because so the next move was rook takes c6 with check, and I knew he would, the only move was to block, and then I could attack with the queen, and obviously he couldn't take the queen with the rook, so he had to retreat the king. Then I captured the king with queen c7 check, and same thing, there's nothing he can do about that. He had to retreat to e8, and that's when he resigned, because he knew that the position was lost. There was nothing he could do. My attack was just too strong, so the next move would have been rook to e3 check, and he would have to retreat to f8, and then I would take the other rook, d8 check. The only move is g7, and then I would capture the pawn, f6 check. He would retreat to h6, and then I would go h4 check. Then he retreats back to g7, and then I would check with rook to e7, and he would have to either retreat to f8 or g8, but if it's g8, then he's in big trouble, and well, same thing with f8, and then I would check with the queen this way, and then checkmate. Okay, so that was the analysis, and so that was one of my best games up to date, and I think there's a couple of things to learn here, that the power of a rook on an semi-open file there in the beginning when he took the c pawn. So even though I was down a pawn, I wasn't too stressed about that, because I knew that once the files were open for the rooks, then it was easier to develop them. So I hope you guys learned something from this analysis, and so that's it for today. Okay, thanks for watching.